Have you ever wished you had a translator to help you communicate? Well, most communication problems aren't random. They fall into three categories. Maybe you've tried it before. You're trying to tell your partner something important, but it lands wrong. Your partner gives you a look, misinterprets your tone, or shuts down entirely. And you're suddenly in an argument that you didn't even see coming. It's frustrating, it's exhausting, and honestly, there are some ways that we can improve it. Today, I'm breaking down the three biggest reasons miscommunication happens and how you can redirect your communication so that it hits the target. If you've ever thought, why can't they understand me or can't even say anything, then this episode is for you.
Welcome to the Love Conscious Relationship Podcast, where our host gives her expert advice about relationships, communication, connection, and intimacy as she explores ideas about how to share, respect, and validate your partner with one loving experience at a time. Now let's welcome our host, therapist and relationship expert, Jessica Myers-Adams.
Welcome to the Love Conscious Relationship Podcast. And today we're talking about communication problems. If you've ever wanted a translator, then this is the episode for you. And I think I'm pretty good at pulling out the message when people are talking, when couples are in my office or when I'm talking one-on-one with someone. But Joe threw me for a loop. When Joe and his wife walked into my office, this is a few weeks ago, and um, Joe said to me that he was not there because he wanted to be. The tension was so thick, you could feel it before it really anything was spoken. And so I asked a question to the wife after some pleasantries. I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important do you think it is to save this relationship? And she said a 10. And I said, how important do you think it is for Joe to change this relationship? Now, this is before he said some of the things he didn't want to be there. She paused and she said, I think it's a 5. So I said, okay, is it okay if I ask Joe his number? And he said 0. There wasn't even a gap. It was just boom. He said then the thing I told you, I don't want to be here. And oh, I thought at that moment, if she can't get him, if she can't give him even 1% of a reason to have hope, then I'm going to have to suggest that she do therapy on her own or she find her own coach. But I didn't jump to this conclusion directly right away. I asked Joe if I could talk to his wife after, some back and forth where it was apparent that he felt like he was a hostage there. And when I said, could we just have a few minutes and you wait? And he said, sure. So I'm getting to how he threw me for this loop because Joe actually wasn't a 0. This is the surprising thing. So I asked his wife if I could ask her why she thought he might have no interest in being there. We talked about giving Joe space, about focusing on herself, and about approaching him differently. And I asked her, really, can I coach you on what I think will be best to say to him? I said, I think that if you can give him some validity to his complaints, if you can say there's some legitimacy to this, he might be interested in talking. And I asked her if there was any legitimacy to his complaints, and she said that there was. So after some time, we brought Joe back into the room. And I wanted to ask him first, though. I said, if you don't want to be here, why did you come? And he said, I told her I'd give her 6 months. Okay, well, this is something. So now I asked the wife if she could share with Joe what we talked about, what we discussed while he was gone. And he seemed to appreciate that. And I said, so I have a new question for you, Joe. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much effort would you put into the relationship in the 6 months? And his answer floored me because here's a guy who said, I have no interest in being here. And he said, a 10. I said, wait, what? A 0 from not wanting to save the relationship at all to a 10 in effort. I had to know more. So I asked him what he was really trying to say. Was he just really trying to tell me that he was in such pain that he wanted us to know that? Was it that his wife saying there was legitimacy to the complaint? And he said, I wanted a professional to help translate to my wife the things I've been trying to say. Oh, I said, well, I'm not a good translator. And there it was. It took me almost an hour to realize that Joe was not saying, I'm done. He was saying, I hate the way things are. Something has to change. I feel controlled. I need help fixing this. So was this a case of miscommunication, or did he soften after and shift after heard and validated by his wife? Honestly, I'm not sure, but it's maybe a little bit of both. And so it made me really want to dive into like, how could I have been so off with this man and what was going on that we were in such miscommunication. And so today I want to talk about the how you can translate and communication, because we did eventually get there. There's really three big reasons why miscommunication happens. Now, under those three reasons, I think it just kind of is an umbrella, but I want to talk to you about how you can start translating these experiences better. Because if you've ever felt like I can't say anything, or everything I say is misinterpreted incorrectly, or my partner is thinking I'm attacking them when I'm not, then this is definitely for you. You know, communication is the cornerstone of a successful relationship. In fact, it predicts right now, today, whether you'll be satisfied with your relationship or not. And I say today because as I was doing some research for this episode, I came across an article by Matthew Johnson and colleagues. And what he found was that negative communication equals low satisfaction in the relationship at the same time. They were trying to figure out, like, if you had bad communication, did it make your relationship worse later on, or was it happening, did it make you negative now and later? And rather than one causing the other later, they found that immediately you are dissatisfied with your relationship if your communication is bad. Well, that's kind of a no-brainer. The other thing that was surprising, though, was positive communication doesn't always improve satisfaction, especially during conflict if you have good communication. So, what does it even matter if we have good communication? I think that it absolutely does because, and I didn't pull this research or statistic up, but I know that John Gottman says something like, I think you need six positives to one negative. So we really need a lot more positive than we do just eliminating the negative. So this may only barely scratch the surface, but here's the thing that it can do. If you can get your communication tracking better, you can have immediate results. You can have immediate results in your satisfaction of your relationship. So, in short, how couples communicate reflects how they're going to feel right now. And I'll even add to this, and I didn't write this down, but I think that when we do the right thing, we end up feeling better, right? So even if our partner isn't following along, the things we're going to talk about today are going to have an effect on you right away. So, why is communication so hard? What was going on with Joe and I and his wife? And what can we do about it? Well, if you keep listening, I'm going to share with you about these three things. There's assumptions and mind reading. Maybe there was a little bit of that with Joe and I. There's some nonverbal interpretations. Imagine that, the way people cross their arms, make faces, roll their eyes, or if we think they did. And then the third one is lack of clarity in messages. So we're going to talk about those three, and I'm going to give you some actual things you can do to improve them right away, which then equals improving your relationship right away. Now, a lot of you know I focus my work on the Bader Pearson developmental model. It focuses on self expression, differentiation, and attachment dynamics. I'm going to talk about what all three of those, just to remind you, or if you're new to the podcast, then maybe you haven't heard. But we're really talking about self expression is a way to send a message, but first you have to know yourself and you have to be able to describe yourself to someone else. So that's self expression. Differentiation involves how well you can listen and understand your partner and how good you are at self expression. And then the third one, we look at attachment because attachment plays a big role in our relationship. It refers to the emotional bond between you and your partner, and it shapes how you seek comfort, respond to conflict, and if you feel secure or anxious in the relationship. And we have touched on this a little bit here, but it's really based on the attachment that you had with your primary caregivers when you're growing up. We can create, we can have a secure bond, we can have an anxious or an avoidant bond. And I did do a podcast recently on that. I'll link that to the show notes if you want to take a listen, if you're interested in more about the attachment. And I'm going to, where it relates today, I will actually be talking specifically about it. The first one that I want to talk about, the first reason miscommunication happens is we make assumptions or we engage in mind reading. So, what do I mean, or what is it? Well, partners often assume their partner knows what they mean or feel without actually saying it. A lot of times, the way we're thinking is when we're in this kind of miscommunication is they should know what I need, or they know what I mean by that. I'll give you an example. I talked about it, I think, a couple of weeks ago. It was super interesting. The wife was telling me, I told him I want him to handle all of the insurance stuff for the kids. And I do not want him to pay the bill when he's at the practitioner, because a lot of times we don't actually have to pay it. So, what does he do? He comes home with the bill and he says, Here it is. I didn't pay it. And she said, I told you that I want you to take care of it. And I asked her, what does take care of it mean? Well, he should just know. It means you should know all of the things that go into our insurance. You have to make phone calls. You have to figure out if it should be paid and then pay it. So she was making an assumption that he knew how this process worked. Or you're telling your partner about the day that you had, and you're assuming they should not fix it, but they should listen. So I'll talk about some things you can do to avoid this assumption and mind reading, but I just want to know this is what we're thinking when it happens. They should know, or they know what I mean. Now, when we make the developmental model connection, we would say that assumptions arise when partners avoid expressing their whole truth. So I talked about self expression. That's where this one comes in. There's two parts to differentiation: being able to say what we think and feel, and also being able to understand what our partner thinks and feels if we say things or if we ask for things, right? Like, so knowing how are our words affecting our partner and being able to say our own words. Well, mind reading happens when we don't express the full emotional truth of what we're thinking or feeling. And this poor self differentiation leads to projecting our fears or insecurities onto the other person. Here's the attachment connection. I told you I would give you what they mean in real time or in this experience. So if we're assuming or mind reading, we're thinking that our partner is going to react based on our past experience. So if we're more anxiously wired, attachment wise, we're going to assume rejection and abandonment. And if we're avoidant attachment wired, we're going to assume criticism. So this is making the assumption that our partner is thinking poorly of us instead of being able to, in real time, understand what's actually going on. So here's what you can do to replace assumptions. Well, you can ask your partner to tell you more about what they're thinking. If you assume they are upset, you could ask them, instead of saying, I think you're upset, you could ask them with some curiosity, hey, what's going on with you? How was your day today? How are you thinking and feeling? Right? That's the way to replace the assumption. And then before we react, we can notice that something's going on and we can ask about it. We can say, I'm noticing that there's something going on and I want to see if we can talk about it and see what we're both thinking and feeling. And when we're trying to tell our partner something we want, I think we need to be really direct, and this is going to come into play with some of the third reason I gave you. We need to be clear and ask for specific things. But I think these two overlap, right? The assuming that our partner knows what we want and the lack of telling it, which we'll get into in a bit. So I think they overlap, but know that your partner doesn't know what you're thinking. Know that you probably don't know what your partner is thinking unless you've asked. So we can avoid some mind reading with that. Now, if I go back to Joe, one of my challenges for myself in today's episode was to tell you how I'm making the connection between what happened with Joe and his wife and kind of this miscommunication, because that's what sent me down this rabbit hole. My assumption was when somebody crosses their arms and flares flares up that they don't want to be here and they don't even want to be in the presence of their partner. That's what he said to me. By the way, Joe isn't really Joe. Joe's the I give names like Joe and Sally and Billy and Bob and whatever. But it is a real story. When Joe told me he didn't want to be there, he didn't want to see his wife. I assumed that she had made him come. I had assumed this whole story about it rather than asking him some clarifying questions, which I'll get into with clarity later. But I assumed that. I didn't, I kind of thought I knew what he was thinking or feeling. Okay. The second one, which really tends to overlap, is the interpretation of nonverbals. Now, if you're like me, I have a little bit more of an anxious attachment. So I'm wired to really scan for facial expressions, tone, body language. And so nonverbal interpretations are how do you read those things? The body language, the facial expressions, and the tone. And are you accurate with interpreting why it's happening? So you might see that it's happening, or you might imagine that it's happening. Now, here's one of the hardest things for me, and probably most of you, my listeners, to wrap your head around. Two things that I have learned that I truly believe in, but when it comes, push comes to shove, they go out the window. First one is that we do not always accurately know what has happened. Um, we have a filtering system through our brain, which tells us that something was said or a look was initiated sometimes when it wasn't. When something feels very familiar to something we have experienced before, if you're an avoidant attachment, if you have an avoidant attachment style, or if you, I don't want to label anybody with that. I would say if you have a tendency, if you listen to my episode on attachment, I say tendency because it's only something like 30% of us have a who don't have a healthy attachment. But if you have a tendency to be avoidant, then whenever something seems familiar to you um, getting some shit from somebody, you're going to assume criticism. Your partner may be just telling you something they're experiencing and talking about themselves or something they wish would happen that you wouldn't even know about. So there's no criticism involved, but you assume criticism. If you're like me and you see the facial expression, you assume they're upset and they're rejecting you. So let's take a look at how do we get better and how do we correct this misstep in communication? Well, if your partner sighs or they look tired or they look angry, do you assume they're upset with you? Well, if we look at the developmental model connection of self and other, that's what those two things really mean, right? When the difference between the two is you is underdeveloped, meaning you don't say what you think and feel and then ask what your partner thinks and feels. If you rely too heavy on nonverbal cues and you don't communicate what seems like overly communicating, then you're probably going to misinterpret things. So you don't have clear communication because you're either not saying what you want or you're not asking about your partner. And again, attachment wounds make us hyper vigilant. We see threats where there is no threat. I'll give you one of the best examples. I saw it over and over again for years in my office, and it was finally a light bulb. And I asked my wife to do something for me, and she was, doing something else, and she huffed. And I was like, oh. And we had established enough goodwill that I could ask. I'm going to talk about like some of the steps to putting these into practice. I think you have to have goodwill as a foundation. And I said, I asked you to do that, and I just made up the story that you huffed. And she said, I'm tired and I don't want to do it. It's not that you shouldn't ask me to do it. I don't want to do it. And it wasn't about me. And I had done enough work where I could see, like, oh, that isn't about me. I did see it because I'm hyper vigilant and seeing the threats, but there wasn't a threat. And so if your partner sighs, grunts, grumbles, can you be curious about what they're experiencing rather than taking it on as you are the problem? Okay. So again, you need some goodwill and foundation, but you might ask if they're feeling frustrated or if there's something going on. And you want to really focus on creating safety in the relationship. Now, as I was doing the research for this episode, I came across an interesting article that said that if we can increase oxytocin, then we can actually decrease some of the negative interpretations. And how do you do that? How do you increase oxytocin? There's a couple of things you can do. It's basically being intimate with your partner. It could be kissing, it could be holding hands. One of the things I really like is the welcome home exercise that we still, I don't know, 5 or 10 years, I don't know when we started doing that, more than 5 years ago. When one of you comes in the door, the other one greets them with a hug that lasts a few seconds. So, really increasing your physical touching and connection can improve can elevate your oxytocin, which can increase your trust. So I think that's one of the things I would recommend for creating safety in the relationship. The other thing that I mentioned is having a foundation of goodwill. Now, when I give you some of these suggestions for doing these things, I would say tread lightly for some of them. If your communication is really poor and your relationship is feeling very how do I want to put it? If you're not feeling like there's a lot of trust to just be able to talk to your partner, then you want to find some way to bring some goodwill into the relationship. In my 7-day relationship reboot, which I'm almost giving away, by the way, I've been talking about this for a while because I think it's just such a quick, like, you can, within a week, you can start to create a really improve your connection. And in the relationship reboot, day one, I talk about the goodwill generator. So you're doing some things that are positive on top of what you've already been doing to increase your partner's curiosity and bring in some goodwill. So once you have some goodwill, then you can start asking these questions of like, hey, I noticed that you sighed and I'm wondering if it was because I asked you to do this, or do you think you sighed? Because our brain really is so funny. I still get stuck into, I didn't say that, or I did say that, or you said that. And that is just, we just latch onto that so hard because of our experiences. So I want to talk about the third reason for miscommunication, and that is lack of clarity. As I mentioned in the first example, the wife with the insurance experience, she was not clear. So what is it if we're not clear? Well, it's struggling to express what we want, feel, or expect. Some common patterns of this would be complaints that are vague. You don't do anything around the house. Was that true? Clarity sounds more like this. I feel overwhelmed because I need help cleaning the tub in the bathroom and feeding the pets. So it's two specific things or three things that she said there. I would like some help cleaning the tub and the shower, and I want help feeding the pets. The hidden expectation is you should know what I need. That kind of overlaps with mind reading, right? You should know or assuming, but not only assuming they know, but giving them the details. So clarity in that is giving them the specifics. For the insurance wife, I want you to know about insurance. I want you to be able to make phone calls, find out what the policy says, make the payments, and I don't want to have to do anything with that. When you take over taking one of the children to the doctor or something like that, that's a lot more clarity. The connection to the DM model or the developmental model is that if we're not confident in expression, we might be afraid of conflict, and we might not say things. We might not ask for specific things. And based on our attachment style, we might get flooded if we're attached anxiously, or if we have a tendency to be anxious. And if we have a tendency to be avoidant, we can shut down and not say what we want. So if we over explain, then we are flooding our partner. And if we shut down, of course, we're just avoiding addressing anything. So, some things we can start to do to turn the tide of that. One is just knowing this. I think this episode is going to be helpful if you haven't heard it or you're hearing it again to be reminded that our brain makes up stories and we need to start working on self regulation. Lots of episodes about self regulation. Some things you can start to do is to get clear. I would like some help with some chores. Can I tell you what those are? I would like if you could help me by doing this and this. And we need to, again, pause a lot of times before we speak and get clear on what our main concern is. We need to check to see if our partner is available to hear it, and then we can tell them. And so, one of the things that wasn't clear in the session that I described with Joe and his wife was that I didn't ask what he wanted to get out of the session or what his expectations were. When he told me he was expecting a translator, well, that was a little bit of some clarity. So, what would you like to translate to your wife? Or what is it that you are specifically looking for? So, just trying to get some clarity because, it wasn't just a one-way problem, but my job is to help people see clarity in the messages. And a lot of times we just need to ask better questions and be curious. Because when I got curious, then the message came out. And how many times can you relate to your partner just saying something like that's so over the top, like, I'm done, or could you turn that into some curiosity? Wow, what is making you so upset about this? Is there anything that would help you right now? So just getting into these curious questions. Last night I ended up giving a woman a list of questions that she could ask if you want to be curious. It's some of the questions were, how big of a problem is this for you? I'm trying to think what else was on there. Is this something you need help with? What is your reason for bringing this up? So those are just some of the questions that I gave her. Let's connect the dots because each of these reasons goes back to one of those core principles of self expression, differentiation, or attachment repair. We need to learn to share openly and clearly. We need to stay connected to our partner while also holding on to our individuality. This isn't, a lot of times people think when they want to fix their relationship that it's an either or. I either need to give in or my partner needs to do something for me. And I think they can both happen at the same time. We can express our truth and we can still be curious at the same time. And if we work on our attachment style or our attachment tendency, we can create some safety and trust in the communication. Try the 5-second kissing. Ask your partner if they would be open to doing that. And, you're going to do it in times where it's not going to lead just directly to, sex or something like that. You can do it. Can we do it before we leave for work or, something like that? So some simple tools you can use to reduce the miscommunication are for the assumption, ask some questions. Is this true or am I making it up? The nonverbal clues are cues, they're clues to probably how we're feeling, is to check in verbally when we're unsure. We see something, we can ask about it, or we can tell them we're making up a story. And then getting some clarity is using some structured communication like, this is what I would like to see happen, or this is what would help me, or this is the time frame I'm looking at. I can't tell you how many times that the partner has said to maybe me or to their spouse, "Oh, I was going to do it." They had intentions to do it, but they didn't know that the time frame either meant right this minute or within the day or within the week, something like that. So use some structure to, hey, could you clean the tub today when you get home from work? And then if we're really going to be trying to communicate well, we want to make sure we know whether that's something they can actually do. Because if it's on my list to do today, I'm getting it done. If it's on my somebody else's list to do, maybe they're going to do it next week or when they remember. And so if they're going to do it when they remember, then maybe I need to give a reminder. Is this something you need a reminder about later, or is this something you can remember? Again, not assuming that if we give I was going to say directions, but isn't it directions? If we give clear requests, then can we also know what that request cost the other person? So again, the three reasons that we were recovering today are assumptions, nonverbal misinterpretations, and lack of clarity. So what can you do to improve your communication? What small thing might you focus on? Might you focus on trying to give more specific requests? Could you work on checking how you're thinking and feeling when you assume that your partner's nonverbals are meaning something? Can you maybe think about, oh, I have a tendency to feel like I'm being abandoned. So maybe this isn't my partner being angry with me. Maybe they're just, because they notice what's happening. They're telling me something wasn't correct. It's not a criticism. Can we focus on one of these three things? I'd encourage you to, listen again. I'd encourage you to get the relationship reboot because that's a quick 7-day way to kind of speed up some repair here. And I want to ask you last thing is what's one thing you can do today to communicate more effectively? One of the questions that I like to ask my coaching clients, and this is not the favorite question probably for them, but it is the best question for me, and I think for a lot of us, is what are you contributing to the repair of your relationship? What are you doing to contribute to the repair? And what are some of the positive things that are going on? And are you giving the same things to your spouse that you're asking them to give to you? So I hope this has been helpful. I hope that we can try to be better translators at what's going on. I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is to when someone says something that is so I think is so specific, I could ask. So you're saying that you don't want to work on anything that you just came here because and just getting clear, like, why did you come? I don't know why I didn't ask that. Why did you come if you don't want to be here? Because I mean, I definitely talked about it. Well, you're like as a coach, I always as a therapist, I always want to make sure that we have consent to work with people. And so I did ask some things like, you're not a hostage here, right? So I asked Joe some things like that in the beginning, but I didn't get clear and I made assumptions, and he definitely wasn't clear and made assumptions that a professional translator like myself should know what he was saying. So, all right, what's one thing you can do today? I like action takers. If you want to leave a comment, one of the things that resonates with you, I would love it. And we'll keep talking about how to translate better.
Thanks for joining us on the Love Conscious Relationship Podcast. If you like this podcast and heard something helpful, make sure to send it to a friend and leave a review about what you liked. For more daily doses of relationship truth, follow Jessica on our socials and TikTok at Jessica Relationship Visionary.